Mr. Anderson again from Science Lab 7, and today we're going to look at one of the steps of the scientific method, but in a little bit more detail. Now, if you remember, we were looking at a 5-step scientific method. Remember, step 1 is to make observations and ask a question. Step 2 is to do some research. Step 3 is to form a hypothesis. And then step 4, very important step that we're really going to talk about today, is to do an experiment. And then, of course, step 5, finally, is to form conclusions. So let's delve in a little deeper to step number 4, which is all about doing an experiment, okay, to test your hypothesis to see, if you're right or wrong. All right, so today we're going to be looking at what we call controlled experiments. Controlled experiments. Here in science, when we run what's called a controlled experiment, these are experiments in which all conditions are carefully controlled. Make sure you write down that definition. A controlled experiment is an experiment in which all conditions are carefully controlled. Now, when we run a controlled experiment, there are many things that could affect the results of that experiment. And those things that could affect the results of the experiment, we call those variables. Make sure to write down that definition. A variable is any factor in an experiment that affects the results of the experiment. So let's look at an example. All right, let's say that we wanted to find out, how does acid rain affect the growth of plants? Well, to figure that out, we want to set up a controlled experiment. All right, so let's look at an example. Let's say that you have 2 plants or 2 groups of plants. Okay, so here we got one group of plants over here, we got another group of plants over here, and that group might consist of 10, 20, 30 plants. All right, so if we're going to run a controlled experiment, and we want to find out how does acid rain affect the growth of these 2 groups of plants, well, we're probably going to take some acid, right? Maybe put it in the water that we give to this plant, and maybe this plant we're just going to give regular water, okay? In these 2 groups, we have one where this is the thing that happens normally, and we call that group the control group. Very important to have a control group. You say, well, why? Why is it important to have a control group? Let me tell you why. All right, it's important to have a control group because then you have something to compare your experimental group to. This is our control group, regular water. This is our experimental group. We added some acid rain there, okay? And if we don't have our control group, then we won't really know if anything is happening, anything wrong is happening, or anything different is happening. Is there a change? How are we going to know if we don't have something to compare it to? All right, so we have a control group, which is what happens normally, and we have an experimental group. And then we can compare them and see what happens, see the difference there. But there's going to be some things that we want to keep the same in each of these groups, right? So let's take a minute, take a 5 seconds or so, and write down a few things that you think we should keep the same in each group. Okay, do that now. All right, so hopefully you've thought of some things that we should keep the same in each of these groups, right? We probably want the same kind of plant, right? We probably want to have the same amount of dirt, same kind of dirt. Probably put them in the same container, same kind of container. Probably give them the same amount of sunlight and the same amount of liquid. It's just that the liquid in this one has some acid in it, right? So those things that we keep the same in each group, we call those controls, right? Those things we keep the same, we call them controls, all right? And the thing that we change, the thing that we want to test, we call that the variable. Now, how many variables do you think we should have when we're running a controlled experiment? 1 variable? 2 variables? 10 variables? What do you think? Well, let me tell you a little story. When my son was just a little baby, he's just a little baby, he's just a cute little baby, we didn't know if he was allergic to anything or not. And so when he started, moving from just eating formula, baby formula, to eating food, baby food, we didn't know what he was allergic to, so we would give him just maybe like peas. For a few days, we'd give him peas, and if he was okay, we knew that was good. And then maybe the next few days, we'd give him some carrots. And if that was good, maybe the next day, we'd give him some yams. Okay, now why didn't we give him peas and carrots and yams like all at once, just to see if he liked them, see what would happen? That's right, because if we gave him all those things at once, and he had an allergic reaction, we wouldn't know which of those things was causing him to react. And the same thing is true when you run an experiment. If you have all kinds of things that are different, if you put this plant in the sun, and you put this plant in the shade, and you give this plant a whole bunch of dirt, and you give this plant a little bit of dirt, and you give this plant lots of water, and this plant not much water, you're not going to know which of those things is really affecting your plant. So when we run a controlled experiment, we want to design an experiment that keeps everything the same except for that one thing that we're trying to test. Okay, the things we keep the same, we call those controls. The thing that we want to test, that's our variable. All right? Now, when we run a controlled experiment, right, we have something that we change, right, the kind of water, and we have something that we measure, right? In this case, we want to know, how does acid rain affect the growth of plants? So we want to measure the growth of plants, and we can do that with our handy-dandy half-meter stick here, and we can measure how tall the plants are growing, how well they're growing. All right, that's very nice. Now, the thing that you change in an experiment, like we're changing the kind of liquid that we're giving these plants, the thing that we change, we call that the independent variable. The thing you change is called the independent variable. Please write that down. Sometimes called the manipulative variable. This is the thing you change. Now the dependent variable, that's the thing you measure. Okay, in this case, it's the height of the plant, right? The thing you measure, that's called the dependent variable. Sometimes we call it the responding variable, but it's the thing that you measure. Okay, so by running a controlled experiment, we can know for sure if something is affecting something else. Now hopefully you'll get a chance to try this out in your very own classroom or even in your own home. So go out there, stay curious. This is Mr. Anderson for Science Lab 7.